Miss Harding's just made me a lovely hot chocolate in the hot chocolate corner. Maybe you could get a hot chocolate and listen to this lovely story that we have got to listen to today. It is One Snowy Night by Nick Butterworth. It's cold in the park in winter, but Percy the park keeper doesn't mind. He puts on his warm coat and his big scarf and wears 2 pairs of woolly socks inside his Wellington boots. Percy likes to be outside in the fresh air. He's saying hello to a little robin. In the middle of the park, there is a little hut. This is where Percy lives. When it gets too cold to be outside, Percy goes into his hut where it's cosy and warm. The animals who live in the park all know Percy's hut. Every day he shares his lunch with them. One winter's night, it was so cold it began to snow. Great big snowflakes fell past the window of Percy's hut. "Brrr," said Percy. "I think I'll need an extra blanket tonight." He made himself some hot cocoa and got ready for bed. Suddenly, Percy heard a tapping sound. There was somebody at the door. Now, who could that be at this time of night? Thought Percy. He went to the door and looked out. There, on the step, was a squirrel. It looked very cold and miserable. "I can't get to sleep, Percy," said the squirrel. "My bed is full of snow." "Oh dear," said Percy. "Never mind. I've got plenty of room for 2. The squirrel snuggled down next to Percy and soon began to feel warm. Knock, knock, knock. It was the door again. Now, who could that be? Thought Percy. Standing outside were 2 shivering rabbits. It's freezing," said one rabbit. We're frozen," said the other. "Oh, you poor things," said Percy. "Come on in and warm up." The rabbit squeezed into the bed next to Percy and the squirrel. There wasn't much room. "Could you face the other way?" Percy asked the squirrel. "Your tail is tickling my nose." Knock, knock, knock. "Oh dear," said Percy. "Now there's someone else at the door." It was a fox. He looked very cold and hungry. "Can I come in too?" he asked. Percy scratched his head and thought for a minute. "Well, if you promise to behave," he said. "I promise," said the fox. And he squeezed into the bed next to all the other animals. Bump, oops, the squirrel fell out. "Who did that?" asked the squirrel crossly. Knock, knock, knock. "Good gracious," said Percy. "It's the door again." This time Percy had quite a surprise. There, on the step, was a badger, 2 ducks, a hedgehog, and a whole family of mice. They all wanted a bed for the night. Poor old Percy and poor old Percy's bed. The animals pushed and shoved and rolled around in the bed, but there was not enough room for them all. Soon the bed covers ended up in a big tight ball. Then, bump, the covers rolled right off the bed and everyone fell on the floor. "Oh dear," said Percy. "This won't do at all. My bed is just too small." Then suddenly one of the mice pricked up his ears. "What's that noise?" he squeaked. Everyone listened hard. Now they could all hear it. There was a scratching and a scraping sound. It seemed to be coming from underneath them. "There's something moving under the floor," whispered Percy. The animals looked frightened, and all the mice started to squeak at once. "Oh dear, what could it be? It might be a monster with fierce claws and sharp teeth." The noise grew louder and louder. Then one of the floorboards began to move. "Look out! It's coming up through the floor!" Suddenly, there was a loud creak. "Help!" cried the animals, and they ran inside. But Percy wasn't frightened. He chuckled, and then he laughed out loud. A small, dark head was sticking up through the floorboards. "It isn't a monster," said Percy.